is home to about 100,000 Palestinians and boasts some of the richest agricultural land in the West Bank. But Qalqilia has been walled in, so that Israel can annex the Israeli settlements around the district. Look at what's happened to the city and surrounding villages, how they've been choked, cut off from each other, Palestinian from Palestinian, caged in by surrounding walls and fences, separated from their livelihood, their land. The farmers of Qalqilia have become landless.
هذا الجدار برك من نص الأرض، قسم الأرض قسمين وكلع كل زيتون وخرب الأرض كلها.
الزيتون لما هم يقصوا فيه حامل والأولاد تحته في الشجرة ويعيطوا وإحنا نكون إن شاء الله إن شاء الله ولا هذا رزقتنا، ما لناش إشي يعني هناك إلا هالقطعة.
אני אתן לך באות, תזהר מזה. زتوني زتوني يابا زتوني يابا يلا ازيكون ازيكين مش ليش تعال تعال ايش لكم ازيكون زتوني ايش ازيكون قبل
An olive tree takes between 7 to 10 years to bear a fruit. And the Israeli bulldozers uproot it and steal it in a minute. The tree for us as Palestinians is alive. We will keep planting and we will keep on living.
The wall, of course, does not stop in Qalqilia. Its path continues 22 kilometers deep inside the West Bank, encircling and annexing the settlement block of Ariel. The Ariel block splits the West Bank into almost two pieces. It creates small enclaves of isolated Palestinian communities and destroys any chance of having a future contiguous state of Palestine. The wall continues its path, encircling and annexing more settlements and more Palestinian land, while devastating many farming communities in its path. Hundreds of thousands of olive trees have been uprooted, 35,000 meters of irrigation network destroyed, more than 40 water wells lost. In the path of the wall, there were many trees, many homes, many farms, many people, and every one of them has its own story. The story of the wall is a long and painful one, and it continues on to the city most devastated by the wall, Jerusalem, and its twin city, Bethlehem. Upon completion of the wall in Jerusalem, tens of thousands of Palestinians will find themselves outside the walls of the city, cut off from their city and their livelihood. By doing this, Israel will have succeeded in changing the demographic makeup of the holy city.
It's heartbreaking what's happening in Jerusalem. You know, at the beginning of this year, it took us months to figure out how to send thousands of children to their schools and teachers to their classes. The walls zigzag in and around Jerusalem, Jews in and Palestinians out. Mothers unable to reach hospitals to deliver their babies, children unable to reach their schools, Muslims and Christians unable to reach their holy places to worship. It is a war against our existence that Israel is waging. Settlements and the wall are the tools to achieve their obsession of Judaizing the place.
Israel is using its settlements to fragment the Palestinian presence in Jerusalem, to destroy East Jerusalem as a coherent urban and economic entity, and in that way to destroy the economic heart of any Palestinian state. It's like an onion. You have concentric circles of settlements. You have huge settlement cities. You have more Israelis living today in Palestinian East Jerusalem in settlements than you have Palestinians. And here is where Jerusalem is really the heart of the struggle, in a sense. Because without Jerusalem, you don't have a viable Palestinian state. And without the settlements around Jerusalem, Israel can't really control the entire area that it wants to control forever. So Jerusalem is really the key.
The town of Jesus has its own story. Israel surrounded Bethlehem with a concrete wall, confiscating half of its land and placing that land on the Israeli side of the wall for the future expansion of the surrounding settlements.
I wonder what Jesus would say if he sees his town as a ghetto behind walls and gates, oppressing people, taking their land and depriving them of their dignity will never bring security to anybody. If I have anything to say to our neighbors and to the Jewish people, please do come back to your senses. Think of justice. Justice is not a foreign concept for Jews or for Judaism. Let my people free.
The wall snakes south of Bethlehem, encircling and annexing the huge block of settlements, Gush Etzion, and other scattered settlements along the Green Line, the border. Upon the completion of the wall, Israel will have succeeded in annexing more than 80% of its settlers and their settlements into Israel. Since 1947, Palestinians have painfully watched, year after year, the partition, occupation, and annexation of their land and their country. The dream of freedom and statehood is as elusive as ever. Settlements and their master designers are confiscating the land, and ultimately, at the end of each day and each year, confiscating the human rights of millions of Palestinians. Settlements are destroying the principle that is the very foundation of the peace process: land for peace, and creating a land with no peace.
It would be very hard to argue that the two-state solution is still alive, if by that we mean a viable Palestinian state.
A continuous Palestinian state is going to be practically impossible. And this is going to be not only the end of the dream of Palestinians of a state, but it might also affect the Israeli dream of the survival of Israel as a Jewish state.
They are asking themselves a simple question. Is Israel willing to acknowledge our historical collective rights in 22% of historical Palestine? The answer is, according to what Israel have done, and this is something which each Palestinian have seen, if not from his door, then from his window. If not from his window, from his roof. The answer is no.
Now, Israel still wants a two-state solution because we still have the same dilemma we started out with. How do we keep control of the country but get rid of the Palestinians?
At the end of the day, as Prime Minister Shamir used to say, they will get used to it. They will get used to the facts on the ground.
They could confiscate our land, destroy our homes, uproot our trees, and imprison us. But they will never be able to imprison spirit seeking for freedom. Walls and ghettos will never bring peace. Justice will.
In my lifetime, if I get to live long enough, like Shimon Peres, I may be present to celebrate it. But if it won't happen in my lifetime, I'm afraid my children will have to forget about it.
I spent a good number of years of my life in Israeli jails. Though I never hurt anybody, never attacked anyone, never even touched a gun. The only crime I ever committed is to dream of freedom and statehood for myself, for my kids. Now, after all those years, the state Sharon has in mind for me and my kids is a bunch of enclaves, cantons, ghettos. It is hard to be optimistic given the circumstances we live under. However, I am. You know, if 70 years ago you would have asked the Jewish people themselves if they ever thought the nightmare of Nazism would be over, they probably would have laughed at you. But Nazism was defeated. And look at Israel now, a strong state, prospering. Now I'm sure Palestinians will be no exception to that. One day we will be free, I have no doubt. Definitely we will be free. No doubt whatsoever.
You ask me how it is that I dare to take a side. You say I loathe myself, pointing out you have lied. You say it's tribal warfare, but I disagree, for the dynamics of the situation are not difficult to see. On the one side is the fighter jet, on the other is the stone. On the one side is the slave, on the other is the throne. For the many there are checkpoints, while foreign soldiers rule the streets. For the one side there is victory, but the people don't accept defeat. The word you need to know is occupation, the very definition of a land without a nation. And if peace is what you're after, then let us not deceive. It'll come on the day the tanks return to Tel Aviv. On the one side there is hunger and bulldozed olive trees. On the other is the army, ruling by decrees. Caterpillars maul the streets, destroy whole city blocks, while children swallow shrapnel for the crime of throwing rocks. Fences are erected around the towns they flatten, and Herzl's own fanatics sleep on sheets of satin. And they water their plantations, drilling ever deeper wells, while the displaced children of the hopeless are filled with bullet shells.